Welcome to Pasa, HSIs, a podcast dedicated to everything Hispanic serving institutions. I'm your host, Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, bringing you the news on what's happening in HSIs. Join us as we explore the history and evolution of HSIs, culturally relevant and liberatory practices, current and emerging research with HSIs, and the policies that shape servingness. Saludos, HSI familia, and welcome to another episode of ¿Qué pasa, HSIs? This episode marks the halfway point in season 2, which means we have shared 15 episodes of the podcast since our launch date of September 12th, 2022. To all our new listeners and subscribers, welcome. I hope you are enjoying the weekly plática, storytelling, and co-creation of knowledge. It is truly an honor to serve as your host and bring you juicy and delicious topics each week. In this episode, I have the honor of talking to Dr. Paloma Vargas, who is the Dean of Math, Science, Health, Kinesiology, and Athletics at Oxnard College, a 2-year public HSI. In her capacity as Dean, Dr. Vargas works with administration, faculty, and staff to determine best practices in serving a diverse student population. Dr. Vargas received her BS in biology from the University of Texas at El Paso and El Paso Community College, both HSIs, and her MS and PhD in medical and molecular parasitology from the Vilsick Institute of Graduate Biomedical Sciences at NYU, New York University. Her graduate and postdoctoral work focused on host pathogen interactions of both parasitic amoeba and Legionella pneumophila, the causative agent of Legionnaire's disease. Dr. Vargas previously served as a biology faculty member, researcher, HSI director, science coordinator, and STEM advisor at private and public institutions. She's an active member of the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Latinos, and Native Americans in Science, or SACNAS, and serves as president of the Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institution Educators, or ASI. You probably remember that they appeared in episode 2 of this season, along with ASI Executive Director, Yolanda Cataño. But I can assure you that this episode is completely brand new and full of STEM goodness. The focus on STEM is important as there is a lot happening within STEM and HSIs. Title III HSI grants have historically had a focus on STEM, and with the entrance of the National Science Foundation as a major funder of HSI initiatives with their Improving Undergraduate STEM Education HSI program, the faculty and leaders in science, engineering, mathematics, and technology fields must rethink the way they have delivered education, especially with the influx of Latine, Black, and Native students pursuing STEM degrees and careers. I first met Paloma at the ASI Best Practices Conference, but have worked with her in several capacities, including serving as editor for the chapter she co-authored with Matthew Ward called Building an HSI Brand, a case study of California Lutheran University, published in Hispanic Serving Institutions in Practice, Defining Servingness in HSIs. You can follow Paloma on social media where she posts about some of her favorite things, science, El Paso, and HSIs. And with that, enjoy the show. All righty, let's get it started. Dr. Vargas, thank you for taking the time to be here today on ¿Qué pasa, HSIs, where we talk about all things HSIs. But before we talk about what's up with HSIs, let's talk about you. Go ahead and tell us about your higher education journey from access to completion.
Well, thank you, Gina, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So as you mentioned, Paloma Vargas, and for me, something that I always start off with, and that's really important for me, is to say that I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. And if you've ever been to El Paso, it's a border town. It's absolutely beautiful. And so I spent most of my life going between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez in Chihuahua. And that really affected my educational journey in a couple of different ways. My parents are immigrants, and so they moved to the U.S. In the 70s, I believe. And I ended up being the first one in my family go through the K through 12 system here in the US. I didn't really know what I was doing in high school. And so even though I was a really great student, I just didn't think about applying for college. I had no idea how to do that. So I had the great fortune of applying to El Paso Community College, which is a fantastic HSI. And that's where I began my higher ed journey. And I started off as a pre-med student thinking that I was going to go into medical school and try to, fix people. And as I went through probably in my second year, I ended up meeting a fantastic faculty member who passed away a year or year and a half ago 2 years, I guess, at the beginning of the pandemic. And he asked me about doing research, and I had zero clue what that meant. I had no idea what STEM research looked like or what it was or what people did. And, he just kind of came up and said, do you want to do research? There's this program called Bridges to the Baccalaureate. It was Bridges to the Future back then. It's an NIH sponsored program that allows community college students to conduct research at four-year institutions with the idea of a bridge that they're going to move into that four-year space. And so I started doing research on monarch butterflies, and it was the best experience. It was just amazing. I learned about monarch butterfly migration. I had a fantastic mentor, Dr. Perez. The faculty member at El Paso Community College was Dr. Nick Lanuti. And they just really got me into research. And I still had this idea, I'm going to go to med school. I ended up presenting at a conference at the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. And was able to present a poster for research and had recruiters come and talk to me. And I didn't even know that was a thing people did. I had no idea what a recruiter was or what they did or what they were doing. And this woman, Debbie Stock, comes up to me and says, you should really do research over the summer at NYU. I didn't even know where NYU was. I could just tell you that. For being from El Paso, I had heard of NYU, but I didn't know where it was. This was before the internet was cheap and inexpensive. It was, I was over there in AOL with the weird noises coming out of the machine. And so I started looking up on Yahoo, what is NYU? And I see this massive school with this massive program. And I decided to apply to their summer research program. And I got in. And they placed me in a lab that was a malaria lab because they didn't have a lot of ecology labs. And they thought butterflies and mosquitoes, they're both insects, so let's put you in that same space. And I started learning about immunology and parasites. And it was awesome. I thought it was the coolest thing that could ever happen. And I just was super sucked into research. I was fascinated by this idea that this tiny organism could manipulate somebody's body in a way that other things just can't do. And it's a eukaryote, so it's the same as us. It has all these different cellular components. It's a very complex system. And so I just kept doing research. I continued to do research after I transferred to the University of Texas, El Paso, which is another fantastic HSI. They've been, they're a historical HSI, if we're going to name it that way. And ended up completing my bachelor's in biology there and minor in chemistry. And I ended up applying to grad school and going out to grad school at NYU. And at NYU, this was kind of this moment where I began understanding that not every community looked like El Paso. El Paso's like 70, 80% Latinx. And I ended up going to NYU, and NYU is not 80% Latinx. And, for me, that was a big culture shock. I had no professors that looked like me. No Latinx professors, no Black professors. The professors that we had that were not white Americans were from other countries, and they had a different perspective of what it was like to be a person of color in the US. So ended up finishing grad school. I was pretty much done with research. I was very annoyed with the white supremacist and the really just non-inclusive environments that I was in, and decided to step into teaching. And so I taught high school for a year in El Paso. I became a certified high school teacher in El Paso, and I taught at El Paso Community College. And that was such a surreal moment, where I was teaching with Nick Lanuti, who had been my mentor. I was teaching with other faculty, and they were all super supportive. And one of the things that they told me was, if you want to be a faculty member, you have to go get a postdoc. And so the journey continued, and I ended up going to a teaching postdoc. It's called the Institutional Research and Academic Career Development Award, also through the National Institutes of Health, IRACDA. And it's a postdoc where you split your time between teaching and research. And I ended up in Chicago at Northwestern, and was doing my teaching at Northeastern Illinois University, which I know you're familiar with. And my mentor there was amazing and said, how do you, what do you see yourself doing from here on out? And that was basically the last pieces of education, was really completing this postdoc. And it was a great experience. It was also a very white institution, but I was able to then reach out to Northeastern Illinois, and they're an HSI. And, that's where, I really started getting more involved in serving my own community.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I learned a lot just in that short amount of time about your journey. And you start like sprinkling in the HSIs, right? Like this was an HSI and then it wasn't, and then an HSI and then it wasn't, right? Like you're like crossing, but talk about crossing, borders, right? Between as far as institutional types. So tell us a little bit more about your HSI consciousness and how you actually came to know that those were HSIs and what HSI is.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had absolutely zero clue that El Paso Community College and the University of Texas El Paso were HSIs. What I did know at the time when I was attending and then after was that they felt very different from every other place that I had been, and that there were things that were happening on campus, on both campuses, that just felt like home. We had at UT El Paso, there was mariachi like every Tuesday for no apparent reason. It was just mariachi Tuesday. We had a lot of faculty that looked like us. My research mentor is Cuban. So for me to really learn from her, that was amazing. I had, for the first time, a Latina that was teaching me science. And I was like, this is a unicorn, right? These people don't exist. But then as I continued to move forward in my education and started my postdoc, that's when I started really learning more about HSIs. I learned about Northeastern Illinois and their HSI mission and their HSI servingness, and was just really excited by the type of work that they were doing. It's a large number of students that are first generation. It's a Polish and Latinx community that is in that space. A lot of students that are refugees as well. And as I started working within that space and learning more about it, it just started piquing my interest in a way that very few things had in the past, right? So parasites were really up my alley. And I was like, yeah, super stoked about parasites. And then I started learning about HSIness, which wasn't even a term until you coined it, by the way. But this HSI piece, started learning about, what HSIs were. And I just was really sucked in. And there was an opening at Northeastern Illinois for a position under a Title III grant. And I immediately hopped on it. I was like, I'm going to apply for this. This is going to be amazing. And I became a STEM specialist for their Student Center for Science Engagement. And once I started in that space, it was almost like I got on this train and it hasn't stopped. And I just keep learning and learning and learning. And Northeastern had this wonderful symposium that they do every year where they highlight faculty work and work of the staff as well. And some of the folks that were working there at the time, and I believe they're still there, were talking about serving Latino students. And that was one of the first times that I heard about really intentionally serving students, and why it was important. And one of the things that I really appreciated about working at the Center for Science Engagement at Northeastern was that there was this really intentional piece about serving Latinx students and not all students. And that was the first time I'd heard that phrasing. So I got sucked into the HSI journey. And when I decided to apply for a faculty position, one of my criteria was that the places I was applying to were all HSIs. I just felt that that was really important. Being a product of an HSI, that I contribute and give back to HSIs in whatever way that I could. And I ended up finding a position where I was a faculty member and director of HSI initiatives, and went to your talk in Nevada at ASI, the Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institution Educators. And I think that might have been one of the first times you talked about decolonizing HSIs. And I was blown away. And although I had already started work on HSIs and thinking about how we could better serve our Latinx students, that was a pivotal moment. I remember exactly where you were standing, exactly what you're saying. I remember your slides. And I remember how the audience, we were all just looking at each other like, why aren't we doing this? And I think that for many of us that are newer in this space, that's really what catapulted us forward. And so that's how I got involved with HSIs. And now I can't leave them. They're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring that story up because Maribel Jimenez, right, who was on episode 10 of season 1, she shared the same story about that exact talk at ASI about decolonizing HSIs. And I remember I was down, and she even said you were down there, right? It was like the stadium seating, like lecture hall. And you're right. Everybody was like really quiet and just sort of staring at me like, whoa, like, are you serious? Is it really, can we really do this? Right. What an important moment, I think, for all of us. Because for me too, right? Like I learn a lot from folks who are doing the work too. But yeah, no, once you get into it, right, you can't get out. And you clearly haven't, because you've been working in HSIs ever since. I didn't know you had worked I don't think I knew at Northeastern Illinois, which, yes, I do have a lot of connections to Northeastern Illinois. So definitely longstanding HSI as well. You mentioned Paso being, UTEP being a longstanding HSI. NEIU has as well. So yeah, you've been in some of the greats, right? They've been doing this work for some time. So let's talk a little bit about your practice. You have been successful at teaching and mentoring Latinx, Black, Indigenous, first generation, and low-income college students. You're also an academic leader within HSI, serving as Dean of Science and Math at 2 different institutions. So talk to us a little bit about your teaching philosophy, and specifically, if you could talk to us about how you bring in culturally relevant lenses and anti-racist lenses, because I know you use that framework, into STEM teaching. Because I think that's, if we could figure that out, I know faculty listening are going to turn it up, right? How do you do it? Because I know you are doing that.
Well, I really appreciate you asking this question. It's something that I've been thinking about for a really long time. And I don't know that I have like an actual like teaching philosophy per se. But nothing that I've written down or that I have in a succinct way to spell out. Obviously, we have those that we turn in whenever we're applying for different positions. But I think generally speaking, I really do believe that all students have the ability to succeed, and that it's our job as educators to figure out how to help them succeed. There are a variety of different methods and andragogy and pedagogy that we can use to really engage our students in that learning process. And, for me, teaching effectively is as much a process of learning from our students and from their community as much as, they are learning from us. And I don't know that we can really say that we're effectively teaching our students and helping them be successful if we don't have a basic understanding of who they are as individuals, their intersectionalities, their background, their community, what makes them tick, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, and how all of that impacts their learning. You asked specifically about culturally relevant and anti-racist lenses in biology. And as I've gone through the STEM disciplines, and I mentioned my background is in microbiology, I didn't really see a whole lot of people that look like me. And there's this idea in the sciences that we can't mix culture and science. And I don't agree with that ideology at all. I think culture should be in our sciences, and I think we would be better scientists. We would have better science available to us if we took into account the culture of those people that are going to be the leaders of our future, the leaders of now, the leaders of our past. I think if we had gone and started, teaching culturally relevant pedagogy, 20 years ago when I was coming up through school, I know, maybe not for a fact, but I know and I feel in my heart that a lot of the people that I went to school with that stopped out of the sciences, that left academia, that left sciences altogether, would still be here. They would still be doing the work, and we would have far more, knowledge of science than what we do right now. And I really do think it's imperative to teach both, right? To connect both culture and science within our educational spaces and within our industry spaces and our nonprofit spaces, because that's what's really going to lead us into the future. This whole idea that, we should just move forward and the only thing that we should talk about is science is preposterous to me. Our students have knowledge, their parents and their ancestors have knowledge that they can share, and we can learn from our students. We can learn either from our students themselves or by honoring the knowledge that their ancestors have given them, that their parents, their grandparents. I work at Oxnard College and we're surrounded by agricultural fields. I know that if I were to talk to one of my students who has worked the fields, whose parents have worked the fields, they know way more about plant biology than I ever will. I know that. And we're not going to be able to change. And this is something that comes up on the regular of, well, biology is biology, or science is science, or physics is physics, and we're not going to change what it is. And they're right? The components of a cell, the way that a cell wall or a cell membrane work, the types of molecular processes that are happening through DNA replication, they don't change. But what we can do is honor the knowledge that came from those silenced voices in the sciences. We can learn about all the people whose voices were never heard because of this predominant white male vision of a scientist. We can talk to our students about why it's important for them to learn all these things. We can talk about the ethics of science and, really tell our students or our learners or the folks in our classrooms and the folks within our learning spaces why it's important to learn the past, the history of science. We can talk about, populations that have higher propensities of diabetes and how some of those studies were not rooted in ethical, pedagogical, or research practice, right? That they focused on a very small, tiny community on the border of Texas, and that's not representative of everybody in their community. We can talk about, how why certain populations don't trust public health officials. We saw that all throughout the pandemic, and we've completely ignored it. And that's part of being culturally relevant and being anti-racist, is that we bring up these difficult conversations within our classrooms. We talk about these things. I've had people ask me, including, folks that I'm really close with, well, how do I make something culturally relevant if I know that it's, we're talking about transcription or translation of DNA, that this factor binds here and this factor binds over here, and this is what we do. You make it relevant to your students. Like, why should they know this? If they're interested in forensics, this is something that they need to know. They need to know how DNA replicates. If they're interested in, let's say, sports, and you're a physics teacher, you're in charge of teaching these young folks kinesiology or biomechanics, and they're your student athlete, this is when you bring that in. You bring that in, how physics and sports are interconnected. If you know mathematics, if you're teaching mathematics, having your student learn about different statistical methods that are used in not only sports arenas, but trading, um, anything that your student is interested in, that's your job. Your job is to actually welcome them and ask what their ideas are. And I've tried to do that in some of my classes. I've also tried to do that in my lab. I've talked to students about, why it's important for them to bring their full selves to the lab, that as they walk into the laboratory space, that doesn't mean that they check themselves out at the door, right? They can come in. I had a couple of young ladies in my lab, and this was my research lab. And, one of them's wearing, like the long acrylic nails, and the other one's got hoops on. And, I've also had students that, maybe wear their shirts a little cropped up, a little crop top or whatever. And the first thing they ask me is, what do I need to change, or what do I need to do to be in this lab? And my response has and will forever be, as long as I'm involved in laboratory work or STEM work, is that they don't have to change anything about who they are. They can come in with those long nails. And I was a little confused when she asked me, and I said, why are you asking me that? And she said, somebody told her that she couldn't be in the lab with long nails because, it's dangerous, and like the she couldn't open tubes and stuff like that, and the gloves would fit too snug. And my response is, wear bigger gloves. Learn how to use your nails to an advantage in the laboratory. Use different tools to open the tubes. There's these cool little like tools that you can use to open these tiny, tiny tubes up. I use them all the time because it messes up your fingers. It gives you like a callus on your thumb. Hoops, right? That was my other student. And my first response to her was, just don't catch anything on fire, because we work with dangerous things, and you have to follow safety rules and recommendations. But that doesn't mean that, if they're not doing something that's going to be, their earrings catching on something, or their earrings catching on fire, their hair catching on fire, then let them be who they are. That's part of it. The other part of it is talking to students about some of the ethical concerns that we have in science. Why don't we talk about Tuskegee? Why don't we talk about forced sterilization in LA? I'm an hour 15 away from LA, and many of my students had never heard about forced sterilization in LA. Most of them want to go into pre-health or pre-med. Let's talk about smallpox and indigenous communities. And, one of the questions that I've had folks ask is, why are we going to talk about this? How is this relevant to your class? How is it relevant to them learning about, feedback loops, or sodium potassium pumps, or balances in your blood of different components that are could then sort of trigger like a cascade effect. And my response to that is, these people want to be health professionals. They need to understand the history. They need to understand why folks are hesitant. They also need to understand who came up with vaccines and the treatments, and how that affected different communities, so that we don't repeat that history. They also deserve to know how to change that as practitioners in their own field, talking to their patients, learning their patients' history, learning that, yes, we all have this sort of certain common biological humanity, but that our culture affects everything that we do, that our culture affects who we are, at home, at work, in life, and how that's going to present to different, people's health. If you're a researcher, an investigator in a laboratory, how that's going to affect your the way you communicate with patients, how's that drug going to affect, people that have generational trauma, which we've seen is an epigenetic trait. Um, so all of those things are really important. Now, when I speak to educators, a lot of times what I hear is, well, that's going to take a lot of work. Yes, it is going to take work. But that's why you're in education, to really provide and support for students. And I've participated in culturally responsive workshops, different types of training, and the bottom line is it can't be a one and done thing, right? I really want people to take away from this that, one, our students already have knowledge. Two, they deserve to know the truth about being in science, and that they belong in it, that they belong being in STEM. And three, that as educators, it's our job to continue to grow and develop. You can't go to one culturally responsive workshop and call it a day and like never go back. It is every day. It is, looking at your practices, looking at how you're running different activities in your classroom, who's participating, who isn't participating. Are you using methods that are going to alienate somebody? And I have to think about that all the time. Even recently, there have been things where I've said, I could have done that differently, or, that wasn't engaging for everybody in the room, or what I said wasn't culturally sensitive, or, that I come in with my own biases. And I think as I go through teaching and now serving as a dean, creating access, thinking about access for students, all of those different things, right, are continually about being better. It's not you go to one workshop and you never work on it again, or you change your syllabus once and then you don't look at it for 10 to 15 years. You look at it every year, you look at it every semester, you look at it every chance you get, you take notes, you change things around, and you get to a point where you're going to be able to recognize these things for yourself. And you're also going to be able to listen to your colleagues and take ideas from your colleagues, or have conversations with your colleagues that are going to be a lot more fruitful and that are going to reduce that work. And what I've seen is that when I change um, pedagogy or andragogy to be more culturally responsive, when I change the way that I teach things, not exactly or 100% what I'm teaching, right? I still have to teach about, as I mentioned earlier, like feedback loops. They're one of my favorite things, so I really like them. Or we're talking about parasites. Parasites aren't going to change, but the way that I talk about the parasite can change. I can ask my students to show up in the classroom, and introduce myself ahead of time. I can ask them to tell me who they are. I can ask them to submit a video and tell me who they are as a human. Beyond I'm a STEM major, I'm a bio major, and I'm a sophomore, and I want to do this, this, and that. No, who are you? What do you like to do? Do you have a job outside of this? Is that, do you have other competing priorities that are going to prevent you from doing collaborative work outside of the classroom? What's your favorite song? Let's develop a Spotify list so that I can put it on every time we meet for class and the song comes on. It's, that doesn't take me more than 10 minutes out of my day. Give me the link to your Spotify song, to a song on Spotify that you like. And I add it to a playlist and I create the playlist for that class. That doesn't take a lot of work. What does take work is that self-reflection and acknowledging that you don't know everything. I learn from people all the time. I learn, oh, that's a really great practice. I should do that. Oh, I'm going to change office hours to student hours. Or, oh, I'm going to change this particular sentence in my syllabus to something differently. Instead of yelling at you about plagiarism, I'm going to talk about why it's good to honor your own work and to honor the work of others. Those are all conversations that I'm going to have, that I can have with my students, that I can have with my faculty, that I can have with my staff, that make a difference. One of the things that I always like to do and always try to do is to learn my students' names.
and to learn how to pronounce it correctly. That's helping them belong in STEM. It's a little thing, takes me 5 seconds, but it's so important. And I know that that makes a difference. I know that it made a difference for me as a student, and I know that it can make a difference for our students. So creating that anti-racist, culturally responsive space for our students, it's more than just a one and done thing. You can't go to one workshop and, say you're done. It's reflection, it's pausing with your own thoughts, it's talking to your colleagues, it's being okay with discomfort, it's being okay with not knowing all the answers, it's being okay with understanding that others might know more than you. And those others might be your students. So anyway, I love this question. I can probably talk about it for days, and I'll probably ramble on or go around in a circle. But I really appreciate this question.
Absolutely. You just affirmed a lot of the things I say when I talk about this exact topic, because I always say start with yourself, right? And that's what you just said. It's like there's a lot of like self-reflective work you have to do. We want like this easy like checklist way of like approaching our curriculum different, but it's like you got to start with yourself and start with the students and start with their knowledge. Like that's what you're saying, right? I love the idea of like you can't change the makeup of the cell, right? It's the approach to the way we're informing students' knowledge. And abuelita pedagogy. I mean, that could be a thing. I could imagine students wanting to go into medical field. Like abuelitas have like their own their own ways of healing us, right?
For sure.
But like that is powerful, right? Being like, and if that's all you've ever heard your whole life, right? The abuelita pedagogy is like, but this is how I cure myself because that's what I was taught. Versus now you're telling me something different. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the number of times I've heard about vaporu, right, and like what vaporu does, right? The abuelita pedagogy. But now the students have not only that knowledge, but they also have the knowledge that they've gained in the classroom. And I always encourage them to go explain it to their parents, explain it to your abuelita, your tia, your whoever your chosen family might be, chosen or given family. Explain to them what you learned in the classroom and how it relates to what they already know. And so that I think that's always really powerful for students.
Absolutely. What is in that little magical bottle anyways? That little tiny green Vicks bottle. Something magical.
Something magical. Absolutely.
But there's some science behind it, I'm sure.
Somewhat. I'm not going to burst everybody's bubble on this podcast.
We want to believe. We want to believe. Awesome. So what about when it comes to mentoring? Like what are the good elements of mentoring in a STEM context? Because that's such an important part, right, of STEM. So what are things you have learned about mentoring students of color and students at HSIs?
Yeah, no, that's mentoring students is probably the funnest thing that I've ever done, and the most rewarding and also the hardest thing. Because students are all unique. They all come with their own ideas and aspirations and what they want to do when they get through, whether it's undergrad or grad school or whatever part of their life they're moving through. And what I've really learned from students is that what they want is somebody to listen to their dreams, to listen to their hopes, to listen to what they want to do. And as much as, often as a mentor, I see a student in a specific way and want to sort of guide them in a specific area. I've definitely had students in the lab where I'm like, you're an amazing researcher. Like, I really want you to go to grad school. And their plans are different. And so I think mentoring is really listening to what our students want and supporting what they want and what is good for them at that moment as much as possible. I've had students who have said to me, I can't continue with school, going on to grad school yet because I have familial obligations. And so I keep track of those students and say, where are you at with this? What can I do? How can I support you? often what I've heard from others is, oh, well, I haven't talked to that student in a while, so I can't write them a letter of recommendation. I have students that I worked with, 8 years ago that I'll still write letters of recommendation for, because that's what my mentors did for me. And that changed my life. So it's thinking about, what do our students want within their own educational and growth spaces. And then specifically in the lab, one of the areas that, I'll be honest, I hadn't talked or thought about very much until I had a more diverse group of students was I had 2 female identified students who were in the lab, and they were both very feminine presenting. So nails, the hoops, long hair. And one of the students asked me, do I have to take off my nails or cut my nails to be in the lab? And it was a foreign concept to me because I don't have long nails, so I've never had to worry about it. And my initial response was, why would you have to like cut your nails to be in the lab? And her response was that I guess one of the classes she was in, one of the faculty members had told her that she couldn't have long nails because she had to wear gloves, and it was going to make it difficult for her to do science in that way. And I thought back to all of my friends in grad school who had long nails or wore the hoops, or, in when we're in the lab, one of the things they tell you for safety is you have to pull your hair back, you have to wear gloves, you can't have anything dangling because you can catch on fire. Those are all real issues. Those are real things. And I've seen people catch on fire in the lab. So that's a story for a different day. But what this student taught me was that it was important to validate her experience and to validate how she was going to be comfortable in the lab. And my reaction was, no, you don't have to cut your nails. We'll get you bigger gloves. And it was as if I had said the most profound thing to her. And I said, your hoops, just be careful. Like, don't get caught on anything. If you feel like you're going to be working on stuff where you might get, I don't want you to get your nice hoops in bacteria juice. That's disgusting. Pull your hair back because we're going to be using fire. Because I don't want you to catch your hair on fire. I've caught my hair on fire in the lab because I use hair product and I leaned in too close to a Bunsen burner and I started smelling crispy stuff. But to me, that was such a eye-opening moment of, wow, like, she knows the science. Her concern is how I'm going to perceive her as a scientist in the lab. Am I going to think she's scientist enough? And that was very important to me to say to her and to any other student that came into the lab. You can't check yourself out at the door. When you come into this space, you come with all of your identities. And so bring them with you, because those are going to be the things that are going to help us make great discoveries. And she did. She stayed in the lab. COVID hit. We ended up going into a virtual space, and she's been accepted into a public health program for her master's. And I believe she's well into her first semester. But it was that little thing that, I think if I had dismissed it or said, no, you have to change this or that, I don't know that she would have stayed in my lab. But she stayed, and, super proud of her. And I think it's really thinking about where our students are coming from and, all of the things that we've been fed as queer, brown, women, however your intersectionalities come in the sciences, and what makes a scientist. What does a scientist look like? And a scientist can be, high heels, hoops, long nails, lipstick in the lab, or it could be short hair, glasses like me, and short nails. A scientist is a person that understands and loves the scientific process. And coming in with our different identities, that's what makes science unique. Without it, without those different identities, I don't think we would have made half of the discoveries that we've made in science over the last centuries. And so having students know that about themselves, that they are a scientist because of what they look like, is important.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great story. As someone who's wearing hoops right now and long nails, and I'm all about my high heels, I could feel that woman's concern, right? Like, if I can't bring that into the lab, then I'm gonna change my major, right? Like, that matters. That's me. That's my identity, right? So I could feel that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I'm sure somebody, and it sounds like that's the case, somebody had already told her that wasn't what a scientist looks like. So whereas you came back in and affirmed it as like, why not? That's what a scientist looks like. A scientist looks like you. It looks like me. It looks like whoever's able to do the work, right? And wants to do the work.
Wants to, yeah.
Yeah, for real. That's awesome. So for the STEM faculty that are listening, what other advice would you offer as far as doing this work at HSIs? I asked you about teaching. I asked you about mentoring. Anything else that you would want to, for the folks that are really tuning in, like they've been waiting for this STEM episode, what other pieces of advice do you have?
Dig deep into yourself. You're a scientist already, so you know the content. The content isn't the problem. It's learning about who you are as an educator, who you are as an instructor, and who your students are. What are the things that are important to your students? I mentioned this earlier in talking about, how being in the lab is important, or my teaching philosophy and teaching biology. But the bottom line is going to be, how do you see yourself and how do you see your students? The content is there. And it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot of time. But if I can say anything, it's that it's 100% worth it. You become a better educator. You become a better human being. Go to trainings, and don't do these one-off trainings where you go to one training and then you never do it again. Take this as seriously as you do your content. Your content is probably your number one thing that you think about, but learning about yourself and learning how to be a better instructor and learning how to honor your students' cultural backgrounds is going to be some of the most important work that you do. So go to trainings, sign up for things, reach out to your Title III and Title V directors on your campuses, to your NSF, HSI STEM directors on your campuses. Get involved and do the professional development that you need. I know I need it. I know that I go to professional development on the regular, and I learn all the time. And I learn of things that I'm doing now that I'm not teaching as much, that I'm doing in my meetings that, perhaps aren't as validating as they could be. But you have to be open to that, and you have to be vulnerable, and you have to be okay with being wrong. And so if there's a piece of advice that I can give, is don't take yourself too seriously. We all have the ability to learn. We all have the ability to change. And if you're really serious about this work, go change.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey. Right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Those of us that do this work, we know that, right? We're like not trying to arrive. We're just trying to keep moving.
Exactly. And changing all the time. I mean, I learn from you all the time. I learn from other folks all the time. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or, like this is, or sometimes like, yes, I did this thing and it was awesome. Right. So just thinking about, what you can do better, and what you're already doing great.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned now you're not teaching as much and now you're spending more time in meetings. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, about now that you're in a leadership position, that's a different level of being able to enact change and enact servingness. So how are you using your position as a dean, as a leader on your campus, at an HSI to do this work, right? And to really keep pushing for servingness?
So I've been at Oxnard College little bit over 3 months now. It'll be beginning of the fourth month, I think, tomorrow. And one of the great benefits of being at a school like Oxnard is that, as far as I've been able to tell, folks are really hungry for learning and change and open to conversations about doing things differently. And so one of the great areas that I get to look over is faculty evaluations. And that is one of the most informative processes that I've ever been part of. One, you get to see folks in their element. You get to see what they're doing in the classroom. But what it also allows you to do is provide feedback. And so as I've been evaluating faculty and staff, this is where conversations about, cultural relevancy and professional development are popping up really early in this process. And we have conversations about why it's important to continue to develop. I'm able to recommend being a dean overseeing the sciences and having a science background. I'm familiar with a lot of professional development opportunities that I know my faculty are going to be interested in. And so part of it is saying, hey, you know what, I really think you would benefit from going to this conference, or I think you would really benefit from participating in this professional development. You've stated as part of your goals that you want to be able to serve our students better. This is a way to do that. So that's one way. The other way is that there's opportunity now and for me to have a seat at the table. And we have a fantastic upper leadership that really values the input of all of our deans. And they trust us. They trust us with having information from our faculty, and my faculty also trust that I'll share information in an accurate manner that really honors what they're feeling. And so that creates an opportunity to really make changes in different areas. So I know for us here at the college, creating additional access to our students is really important. And so how do we create access? How do we talk about access? So within our math departments, talking about, for those that are outside of California and that are within California, AB 705 and AB 1705. AB 705 is a policy that was passed that really get students into college transfer level courses immediately. So we don't have those remedial courses that many of our students were getting stuck in for years. And so we've had really interesting and deep conversations within our mathematics department. They had already started doing some of this work before I got here, but offering supplemental courses or offering courses that are support courses that are co-requisites to these transfer level courses like pre-calculus or college algebra or calculus, depending on what the student is doing. So the student isn't stuck in a cycle of taking courses that aren't going to be applicable to their degree. But that we do have these support courses and we have these additional resources available in a manner that is going to be supportive of our Latinx students. So what is going to be helpful for our Latinx students to be successful? Is it, are we offering courses at the correct time of the day? Many of our students are first gen and they're also first time parents. Or they have full-time jobs. And so for us, it's really thinking about what does the schedule look like, which I never thought about before. Like, why do I think about the schedule? But, are all of our intro bio classes in the morning? Well, what does that do for the student that works all day? Or maybe they have a part-time job and they work in the morning. No, we need to offer an evening class. For some of our lecture courses, do we offer in-person, hybrid, and online fully asynchronous lecture courses for some of our areas? Others we can't, because some of the other schools won't accept them as transfer classes if they're fully online, which is a different topic for a different day. But looking at all those different policies of access with our faculty, with my faculty, and saying, what can we do better for our students? Creating that schedule that is going to be have a diverse time slots that has ability for students to coordinate their classes in a way that's going to be supportive of their life. The reality of it is that our students are between that 18 to 36 age range. Some of them are straight out of high school. Some of them have been working for years and they're coming back to school, offering short-term classes. That's something else that we've started stepping up, and that I'm very supportive of as a dean, and that we've talked about how do we get short-term courses for students that maybe they're coming back for the first time in a long time to college, or maybe they're working and it's their first time in college. They've been raising families or taking care of loved ones, or, life just happened and they're coming back for the first time to college. But maybe they don't want to be in a 16-week class. Can that class be 8 weeks? Can it be 12 weeks? If we do an 8-week math class, can we set up a second 8-week math class right after it so that they can take the next level? And instead of having to wait an entire semester to take another math class, they can immediately jump into that next level math. Or, maybe they start taking the math class and they figure out, oh man, I don't remember a lot of this. I need a support class. So let's have a short-term support class so that maybe they drop the first class, but we pick them up in the next class and ensure that they're retained, because now we have a support class that goes with it, and that faculty member can basically guide them to register for that next class. So there are a lot of conversations here at the college and within my division about access and making sure that students are being supported in the best way possible. And so now I get to have those conversations, which I was never part of before. How do we reach out to high schools? How do we get our dual enrollment increased? When can we offer classes? What do we need so that our students are successful here, and increase that enrollment? Not only for ourselves, but really for our community. The Oxnard community is a beautiful place. It is probably the only place outside of El Paso that I could ever consider home, like really deeply in my soul. And the people here are just amazing. And so why not give them the best opportunity to be successful? And if we can do that through policy and logistics, then I think that gives us, that's our duty as a community college, is to serve our community. And I feel like the leadership here really understands that part.
Absolutely. I'm going to say shout out to the 805 because I say it every time because we be having guests. Shout out to the 805. I'm from the 805 and several of our guests have been from the 805. So I'll start there. But what I wanted to say is, as you were talking, I was thinking about, so the first part of questions you were talking about, like in the classroom, the curriculum, the pedagogy, and there's been a lot of focus in that area in HSIs, right? We spent a lot of time doing that. But then you really lit up and talked about this really important part that I don't think we've done as much work on, which is the decision-making and the leadership and the policies, which I talk about in my new book, right? I'm like, yes, curriculum, pedagogy, important, but what are the decisions that are being made? And the reality is, with both your answers or those stream of answers, you said, what is the student's need, right? Like you put students at the center. You said, who are they? Are they working? Do they have to go home and take care of parents? Do they need a night class instead of a day class? Do they have children? Do they, all these things that in reality is like, we have to do student-centered work at HSIs because otherwise you're going to miss it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Such an important part. Mm-hmm.
I think, without doing that, we've all seen across higher ed, especially community colleges, that we have had a decrease in enrollment. And that's been seen in a lot of our STEM courses. And so thinking back on what that might be, for me, I think it's been a realization of how can we make these STEM courses more accessible to our students so that they can be successful? What are the different areas that we need to continue to implement? And of course, culturally relevant pedagogy is right up there, along with all of these logistical and policy and practice matters, because we can change the curriculum all we want. If the student can't make it to campus, then we're not reaching that student. We've lost that student.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how culturally relevant or anti-racist or significant to their lives it is, if they can't actually access it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Such an important piece. So you have done work at both 4-year and 2-year HSIs, and now you're, in a 2-year HSI. And I think a lot of the stuff you're talking about is unique to the 2-year context, but maybe not. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not there are, the differences you see between 2-year HSIs and 4-year HSIs, or are HSIs, right? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think we need to dig in deeper into the differences in order to really do good work at both.
Yeah, no, I think particularly being in California, this puts us in a really different space, especially being at a 2-year college. So the 4-year colleges that I've been at in the past, one of them was a private liberal arts institution, and then the other one was a 4-year public institution. And what I found at both of those institutions was that as HSIs, it didn't seem to be as much as part of the forefront of knowledge. HSIness seemed to be a little bit more siloed, and I think that's changing. I think with the work that you've done, the work that others have also brought up as well, that wonderful first episode of season 1 about, are you serving or are you serving with a dollar sign? I think that's created a lot of interest in expanding the role of HSI directors and the HSI STEM grant directors as well. And we've seen in the last few years, at least, the development of HSI director positions that oversee an entire institution or are responsible for initiatives for an entire institution. Dr. Marla Franco is a good example of that. Dr. Cindy Muñiz is another example of that. My previous institution had me as HSI director, HSI initiatives director. And so we're seeing these kind of larger positions being created, but it's a really different thing at a 2-year public California community college where everything's very tightly regulated. And so I really think that within this space, there's a very big difference in the way that grants or initiatives are tied together. For example, at Oxnard, we have 3, I believe, separate grant directors. And one of them is 2 of them are Title V directors, one's a Title III, and we just got another grant, another Title V. So we have all of these grants, and they're all separate directors. And I'm still trying to find out, right? Because I'm new at Oxnard. I have wonderful support from the president and vice president of academic affairs to do a lot of HSI work. And so I think there's a new movement to try to tie all of these pieces together. But I have a feeling that this is not just a feeling, but I've seen it where at our community colleges, we have our Title Vs and our Title IIIs and our HSI STEMs. They're all different entities, and there isn't a lot of cohesiveness within that. And when we think about, our STEM students, tying it back to STEM, when we think about our STEM students can greatly benefit from that Title V work. Our Title V students can greatly benefit from that Title III HSI STEM work. And bringing them together, I think, would help create some of that cultural competency for our students now, so that they're actually learning those pieces as they go through college. And, really looking at what that might look like in a 2-year college, particularly in California, because we're so heavily regulated. I would love to see a thought piece or a, big research study to say, where are HSI directors housed? Who do they report to? Here at Oxnard, I believe they all report to our VPs. So they either report to our VP of Academic Affairs or our VP of Student Affairs, and they have a great relationship, and they share a lot of information with each other. But I do worry at other institutions, what if they don't have a great relationship? What if there isn't information sharing? And so I'd love to see more information out there about how grants are being managed at the leadership level, and who's getting to know all this information, and how do we make that into an institutionalized process so that we have more information to share with our own campus communities about being an HSI.
Absolutely. You want to do that study together?
Let's do it. I'm down.
That is an important question, though, right? It's like, where are these initiatives being housed? I am working with a couple other California community colleges right now, and it's exactly like you said, like 2-3 grants going on at the same time, and they all have different directors, and they're all in different spaces, and they have different things. I guess there's some pros and cons to that, right? Like, I mean, these grants do allow you a lot of autonomy. I think we know that, right? To do what you write the grant to do, or whoever wrote the grant. If you're implementing it and didn't write it, right? You have that autonomy. But there is also some benefits of coming together, right? And doing this work together. Yeah, for sure.
Having people talk would, I think, remove some of the challenges that people face in running some of these grants. And, I don't know if it, started off that way because there were few grants that were being provided at the time, and there's still limited funding no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But, how do we manage that piece? And I love to see, what other folks are doing and what has been working, what hasn't been.
Yeah, for sure. Another interesting thing you said is that in California, and particularly the community colleges, y'all are very regulated, right? Which I talk about that in my new book too, is like the external influences. If you're in a state that the policy is allowing or not allowing servingness, it affects your ability to do this work, right? So, I mean, is that what you're seeing as like, are the restrictions helping or hindering the servingness efforts?
I think it can be a little bit of both. So it depends on the policy. We are, we report to the California Community College Chancellor's Office. And an example of this was AB 705, which I mentioned earlier as we were talking. I think it's a great idea. AB 705, getting our students straight into transfer level courses. I think the way that it was proposed was, I think, a little bit jarring for folks. And it's taken 5 years to implement AB 705, which is specifically about our math courses and English courses as well. So in some cases, it can be very beneficial. I think AB 705 is an example of that. But then in other, cases, there's another policy coming down. And I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It might be 928. That is essentially removing the requirement for lifelong learning or physical education, kinesiology classes, which, when we think about our students and we think about who we're serving, they might need that 1 unit of a kinesiology course or a physical education course or exercise science course to get them to that 12 units. And maybe they can't afford to go to 14 or 16 units with an additional class. Or maybe it's just not good for them to take that level of units. And so I think we're limiting our students' ability to make choices for themselves. In some of these cases, I think some of are very good. Others are, I think, well-intentioned, but I'm not sure that the impact is really known, and we won't know for years. And for me, that's just not, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right to say well, we're going to try this out and see how it goes, which I know how, most things in education, that's usually how it goes. We're going to try it out and see if it works. But when we're talking about things like courses on, lifelong learning courses, personal growth courses that help students with maybe those basic skills that they may not have. I think particularly for community colleges and the populations that we serve, I don't know that that's the healthiest approach. And I think we're going to turn students away. I think students are going to feel disenfranchised from the community college system. And so I think we really need to be aware of how the impact of these different policies are going to affect our students. And for those of us that are in the community, we don't even have to be in a leadership position. Call your congressperson, call your senator, call your local officials, to say, hey, I've looked into this. I think this is going to affect my community negatively. So I don't think we should pass this. These are all Senate bills or congressional bills through the California government. So for us, I think it's really important to just be aware that these policies are coming down and how they're going to affect our students. How are they going to affect our STEM students? How are they going to affect our sociology students? How are they going to affect our students in the liberal arts or humanities? And have a real stock in what we think as educators this is the impact of this is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that through and through your thread is that how's it going to affect the students, right? The students at the center, because the reality is policies sometimes spark people's concerns about, well, then now we don't have courses to offer. And now we, how does it affect us, right? As faculty and leaders, right? Versus like your strong commitment to like, no, how does it affect the students? Right. Because and I know those conversations come up, right. With like within departments, within faculty, right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but for you, HSIs and Servingness is at the core is students, right? Like how is it going to affect students and how do we do this work with and for our students at the center? So, which is why you're a good leader for an HSI. So thank you for being here with me. Of course, you got to answer the last question. Nobody gets out of here without answering the last question. So the final question, and it can go any which direction. It could be in English and or Spanish, however you want. But ¿qué pasa, HSIs?
HSIs are change. HSIs are the future. And I think HSIs are they're going to be what's going to get us through some very challenging times in education that I think are coming forward. But HSIs and our students, more importantly, our Latinx students, are going to be what leads us into some great times in education. So I think that's what's up with HSIs.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you being here with me today. So thank you. With that, we are going to sign off.
Thank you.